Now, sacks all time. This is Aaron Rodgers back on top over Brett Favre. Aaron Rodgers was sacked 530 times. Brett Favre, 438. All right, welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and today we're back looking at another team from the NFC North. So at this time of this recording, we have 36 days to the start of the season. We actually had tonight the first preseason game. Amazing, and it's not even August. So today we're going to look at the third place Green Bay Packers. The Packers finished the season with a record of 11 wins, 6 losses. At home, they were 6 wins and 3 losses, and on the road, 5 and 3. And their demise was in the division, where they were 1 win, 5 losses, which explains why they ended up 11 and 6. 5 of their 6 losses were within the division, so they ended up third in the division. They did make the wild card game, but they lost to the Eagles 22-10, and that was the end of their season. Not too bad, considering some of the players did not have their best season. And we'll look at that right now as we look at the Packer players of 2024 and look at how they stand against the greatest Packer players of all time and other NFL greats of all time. So we'll do that right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. And as usual, we'll start with the coaches. Green Bay has been a team since 1921. And the coach who started that very first year, Curly Lambeau, is still the all-time winningest coach for the Green Bay Packers. Curly Lambeau, from 1921 to 1949, had 209 wins in his career with Green Bay, won 6 championships. Really a great coach. Mike McCarthy, second, from 2006 to 2018, had 125 wins. He also had 1 Super Bowl. And then the coach probably everybody's heard of, whether you're even a football fan or not, Vince Lombardi, from 1959 to 1967, had 89 wins. Quite a few wins, actually, in the short time he played. Also won 5 championships. He had a winning percentage over 75%, so very good. Then we had Mike Holmgren from 1992 to 1998 with 75, and then Matt LaFleur, who's current coach since 2019, has 67 wins. So, 8 wins to tie Mike Holmgren, 9 wins to move into 4th place, which I think is likely this season for him to do that. Be a very disappointing season if he can't get 9 wins this season. So that's your coaches. Some great coaches in the history of the Green Bay Packers. A lot of championships, especially with Lambeau and Lombardi. And only 2 more outside of those 2, but still pretty impressive. All right, let's start with the career passing leaders. And we start off with Brett Favre as the all-time leader in yards throwing. Brett Favre from 1992 to 2007, actually, had 61,655 yards passing. Aaron Rodgers, if he'd have stayed 1 more year, which he didn't, but if he had, he most likely would have been the number 1 quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. But he was the quarterback from 2005 to 2022. He had 59,055, so he was only 2,600 yards behind. So very likely he would have caught him with 1 more year. Those are your top 2 by far. Jordan Love currently is 7th in yards. He has 8,154. With a 3,400 yards, which is highly likely, considering, that he threw for 33.89 in a bad season, um, and in 15 games, should very likely move all the way up to fifth place. And then it's going to be a couple years before he can catch Lindicki for fourth. But those are your top quarterbacks. They're, like I said, this is one area where Green Bay has some great players. Brett Favre currently all time in yards. Brett Favre finished fourth all time with 71,838 yards. Just only 102 yards behind Peyton Manning. So he's number 4 all time. And Aaron Rodgers currently is number 7 all time. And what's fascinating about this is Aaron Rodgers, as everybody knows, is with Pittsburgh Steelers now. He has a good chance. He only needs a little over 2,100 yards to move from 7th to 5th. And currently in 5th place is Ben Roethlisberger, the all-time passing leader for Pittsburgh Steelers. So he'll end up probably, if he plays an entire season, probably passing Ben for 5th place all time. So just as they are 1-2 in Green Bay Packers status, they'll be number 4 and 5, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, as far as all-time quarterbacks and yardage. Now, when we're looking at touchdowns, this is where we see a flip. Aaron Rodgers is first with most touchdowns throwing with 475, and Brett Favre has 442. Currently, Jordan Love has 60. Really not that impressive for the amount of years he's been on the team. You're not even averaging. You're averaging like 20. So really not that great currently. But not to say that he can't improve, but just the way it is right now. Aaron Rodgers with 475 with Green Bay has 503 total currently. So he's got most of his came with Green Bay, and then the rest of them came with the Jets, and now he's with Pittsburgh. But he's got 503, and again, interestingly enough, he's right behind Brett Favre, who has 508. So it's likely he'll pass Brett Favre all time for touchdowns throwing. And Peyton Manning's the only other guy he could possibly catch. Peyton Manning has 539. So Aaron Rodgers would need 37 to pass Peyton Manning. It's possible, but that seems highly unlikely in this stage in Aaron Rodgers' career and playing for Pittsburgh. I do not see him throwing that many touchdowns, but he'll definitely pass Brett Favre. So again, those two battling it out for 1-2 among each other. Now, when we're moving on to the negative categories, for example, interceptions. Well, that's Brett Favre, again, by far, back on top with 286 interceptions in his career with the Green Bay Packers. And sadly for Brett Favre, he leads the entire NFL in all time with interceptions with 336. And in fact, just with Green Bay alone, he had the record. But he even went beyond that with the other teams he ended up playing with the rest of his career. They ended up with 336. George Blanda had 277 to be in second place. George Blanda held that record for a little while, for about 35 years, until Brett Favre came along, 34, somewhere along that lines. And as usual, when it comes to interceptions, you won't see the current players anywhere near that kind of a number. Be a long time before they reach that. Jordan Love has 25, so he's way, way back there in the listing. Now, sacks all time. This is Aaron Rodgers back on top over Brett Favre. Aaron Rodgers was sacked 530 times. Brett Favre, 438. Jordan Love currently has been sacked 47 times. So really, that's a decent amount of number. He's being sacked at a 4.1% rate, while Aaron Rodgers was sacked at a 6.5% rate. So quite a bit of difference. But with that 530 for Aaron Rodgers and you tack on what he got, another 41 while at Jets, he's leads the NFL all time in that category with 571. So not too good. Brett Favre is sixth with 525. There's only 8 quarterbacks that have been sacked over 500 times. And incredibly, 3 of them are playing right now. So you've got Aaron Rodgers, you've got Russell Wilson is 4th right now. He should easily move up into 2nd place. And 1st if something was to happen to Aaron Rodgers. He's got 560. And then Matthew Stafford has 502. So he'll move up this list a couple spots probably, but not any farther than passing Brett Favre for 6th. But so 8 players, 3 of them currently playing as far as sacks go. So those are your quarterbacks. Now let's look at the all-time career leaders as far as running backs go. And with some of the better running backs, I wouldn't have thought Ahman Green would lead the list. I mean, you've got Paul Hornung, Jim Taylor, Aaron Jones, but Ahman Green from 2000 to 2009 had 8,322 yards rushing to lead the team. Jim Taylor, who had the record since 1966 and was passed in 2009. So he had the record for 43 years before Ahman Green broke it. But Jim Taylor had 8,207. They're the only 2, not only over 8,000, they're only 2 over 6,000. Aaron Rodgers is 3rd from 2017 to 2023 with 5,940. So those are your top. And if you're following the Green Bay team at all, you know that there's nobody currently because they picked up the new running back, Josh Jacobs, who had a good season, but it's only his first season with Green Bay, so he's got 1,329 yards, which ties him for 37th. So another year like that, though, he could move up as far as, well, he could move up if he had even a better year, up all the way up to 10th. So from 37th to 10th, if he doubled his current output, which is very possible for him. He really had a good season, and I think they're going to be banking on him again this year. So those are your leaders currently as far as yardage goes. And unlike the quarterbacks, these kind of numbers aren't anywhere near the all-time greats. Now, when it comes to touchdowns, it's Jim Taylor who's on top, flipping with Ahman Green. Jim Taylor had 81 touchdowns. Ahman Green had 54. And then Paul Hornung from 1957 to 1966 had 50. So that's pretty incredible. You had Paul Hornung and Jim Taylor playing at the same time. Pretty incredible. Now, Paul Hornung did a lot more than just run with the ball, so that's probably why his numbers were not as the same as Jim Taylor's. But those are your top 3. And Josh Jacob already is 25th because he had a good season with 15 touchdowns last season. So we'll see how he does, how far he moves up this list in the next season. Those are your running backs. Now, when we're looking at the receivers, we'll start with receptions. Donald Driver, another one you wouldn't exactly think of because you had Davante Adams, you had Sterling Sharp, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, James Lofton. I mean, Don Hudson again. Some incredible wide receivers. And honestly, I would have thought maybe they had more yards and more receptions. But Donald Driver had the most with 743 receptions. And again, this is a category where these numbers are nowhere near the highest numbers all time. Davante Adams is 2nd with 669. And again, it's one of those things, one more year with Green Bay, he passes Donald Driver, but he did move on. So it is what it is. But he ended up with 669 to finish 2nd. And those are your top 2. These current batch of wide receivers, none of them are anywhere near the top. I mean, they're in the 30s and the 40s as far as where they stand currently. So they've got a long way to go. And it's a case of not one guy who stands out. So the receptions currently are just getting spread around. So it's going to take a long time or a different system as far as the passing game goes where one person might dominate. So now when we're looking at the yards, again, it's Donald Driver with 10,137, just beating out James Lofton, who was a receiver for the Green Bay from 1978 to 1986. He had 9,656 yards. Not that far behind, considering Donald Driver had 743 receptions. James Lofton had 530. Big difference was Donald Driver averaged 13.6 yards per reception, while James Lofton averaged 18.2. Quite a big difference. James Lofton was incredible in his career. Now, when we're looking at these guys all time, well, that's where James Lofton does make the list. In his career, he had 10,137 yards. 9,656 yards with Green Bay. He ended up with over 14,000 yards, 14,004 to finish 12th all time in the NFL as far as receiving yards. So quite an impressive career for him. Obviously, most of it came with Green Bay, but he still ended up with another 4,400 once he left Green Bay. Those are your top wide receivers. Let's look at the touchdown numbers. Now, this is again where you see another flip. Don Hutson, on 488 receptions, had 99 touchdowns. So almost basically 1 out of 5, somewhere just around that anyway. 1 out of 5 of his receptions were a touchdown. That's an incredible percentage. 20% of your catches are touchdowns. Davante Adams had 73 touchdowns to finish second. Donald Driver, even though he led in the other categories, was way down at 5th with 61. Those are your top ones. And again, the wide receivers currently on the team, there's none of them up here anywhere near the top. They're way, way back in the 30s again. So it's going to be a while before you see them move up this list to any kind of respectable number. Now, Davante Adams, like I said, had 73 touchdowns with Green Bay. He currently, all time, he has 103, which puts him 10th all time in the NFL. There's only 12 wide receivers that have 100 or more receptions, and he's one of them. Pretty incredible. Don Hutson missed it by 1 touchdown. So they've had some really good receivers. None of them where they completed their entire career. Well, Don Hutson did, but I mean, as far as these other guys, to get farther up the list and as far as yardage and receptions and touchdowns go. All right, let's look at the defense. And we'll start with interceptions. So with interceptions, Bobby Dillon from 1952 to 1959 had 52. This is interesting because I would have expected a bigger number from a Green Bay team that started in 1929. But he is the leader. Willie Wood from 1960 took up the very next year, from 1960 to 1971, had 48. Those are your top two. And again, as I've talked about all the time, ad nauseum, as far as interceptions go, there's nobody currently playing that is anywhere near the top. The most current player was Tremont Williams from 2007 to 2019. He had 30, and he was 10th on the team. So it'll be a while in this category where you see somebody that's currently playing. If you can get a player that can stay long enough through 2 or 3 contracts, maybe can make it higher up the list. But when we're looking at tackles for loss, Clay Matthews is by far the leader here. He played from 2009 to 2018. He He has 121 tackles for loss, which is quite a bit more than Kabir Gabaja Bayamila, who played from 2000 to 2008. He had 74. So you see 121 to 74, a huge difference. Those are your top two. And you would hope that there'd be somebody more recent. And the only one, you had Kenny Clark, who's on the team. He's sixth currently, been on the team since 2016, and he's got 51. It's a possibility he could move as far as fourth. If he had 10, he could tie for third. That's as far as he's really going to get. He'd tie Aaron Campman, who had 61, if he could get 10 this season. We'll watch and see if that happens, but that's about the best we got right now for this team as far as that goes. Now, when we're looking at the other category of defense that I'm looking at, we're going to look at sacks. And that's where Willie Davis does jump back up on the top here over Clay Matthews. Willie Davis had 99.5 sacks, and Clay Matthews was second with 83.5. Those are your top two. So really only one player in the 90s, nobody in the 100. Usually almost every team will have at least one player that's had at least 100 sacks, but not this team. Reggie White, just out of curiosity, was fifth on the team with 68.5, but he only played on the team for 6 years, so he's averaging over 10 a season. That's incredible. If he'd have been on the team longer, he would definitely been the leading sack man for the team. But Willie Davis was the guy as far as Green Bay goes. And current players, this is a category where you'd expect to see somebody more recent, but you don't. There's really only Rashawn Gary is the closest. He's 13th currently. He's been on the team since 2019. He has 39 sacks. So he's got a little ways to go before he can make the top 10, let alone push the top of the leaderboard here. So those are your leaders in career stats. So let's move on to the season leaders, and we'll go back to the quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers has 4 of the top 5 spots when it comes to yards passing. His best season was in 2011, and it's the number one season over Lynn Dickey, who had held the record since 1983 when he threw for 4,458. So finally in 2011, 28 years later, comes Aaron Rodgers, who throws for 4,643 yards. So beats him by less than 200 yards, but still sets the record for the Green Bay Packers for the most yards in a single season. Now, this past season, obviously, Jordan Love only played 15 games, so it was not a good season. His numbers put him at 31st. Not that great. With that many yards, he finished 31st with 3,389 yards passing for the season. Not that great. And when you're looking at it, comparing it to the entire NFL, he ended up finishing 19th. So middle of the pack as far as yardage goes. A few more games, still would have probably finished upper middle pack. I don't know if he'd have made it to 4,000, but he could have. Probably not, though, actually. So not one of his better seasons as far as yards go. Now, when we're looking at touchdowns, Aaron Rodgers, again, not the same season when he threw for all the yards, but in 2020, he had 48 touchdowns to set the Green Bay Packer record. That's the most. Only 3 times has it happened where there's 40 or more touchdowns thrown in a single season, all done by Aaron Rodgers, who holds the top 4 spots. So 48 was his record. When you're looking at Jordan Love, he threw 25 touchdowns. So really not too bad, 25 touchdowns when you're looking at the amount of yards, but really not too good either. It's just kind of average. and which is why he finished in the NFL at 10th as far as touchdowns go, passing. So just kind of average again, a little above what he did in yardage. Still not that great. When it comes to interceptions, Jordan Love had 11, which is nowhere near the record for interceptions by the Green Bay Packers. That was set by Lynn Dickey and Brett Favre. Lynn Dickey in 1983, that year he threw for what at the time was the most yards ever by a Green Bay Packer player, through, what did I just say? 29 interceptions. Brett Favre tied him in 2005 when he threw 29. In that year, in 2005, Green Bay ended up 4 wins, 12 losses. Pretty bad season. Really a terrible amount of interceptions that Brett Favre ended up throwing. Those are the leaders. And again, like I said, Jordan Love threw 11, which really didn't put him too high up on the list as far as interceptions go. He ended up, again, actually, it's interestingly, he tied Aaron Rodgers with 11, but he ended up tied for 12th in the NFL. Pretty good company. Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Jordan Love all had 11 interceptions. So, as well as Kyler Murray. So those are your leaders in interceptions. Category you don't like to be the leader in, but it happens. And the last category we look at as far as quarterbacks go are how many times are they sacked in a single season. And that record is held by Aaron Rodgers, who holds the top 3 spots. Twice he was sacked for over 50 or more. In 2009, he was sacked 50 times. And in 2012, he was sacked 51 times. Those are the leading numbers. That's a pretty high total. He got sacked at a pretty good rate, 8.5% sack rate, which is really high, higher than any other player in this recent times, really. Now, somebody who really topped him, well, let's look at Jordan Love real quick. He was really sacked, incredibly low number. He was sacked 14 times, but his sack rate, instead of 8.5%, was only 3.19, so quite a bit lower. Didn't take a sack nearly as easily. Unlike Caleb Williams, who led the NFL last season in sacks, with 68. Pretty rough season for him as far as sacks go. Not only was 68, as I probably mentioned before, but 68 put him tied for 3rd all time in sacks in a single season, only topped by David Carr and Randall Cunningham. So, not a stat you like to see. All right, that is the passing game. Let's look at the running backs. Ahman Green, who led the team all time in yardage, also has by far the best season rushing. In 2003, he had 1,883 yards rushing to lead the team. Jim Taylor, who had the record since 1962, so it took 41 years before he broke it, but he really crushed the record. Jim Taylor in 1962 had 1,474, so he passed him by over 400 yards, so pretty impressive season he had. Now, Josh Jacobs, this past season, finished 5th all-time with the Green Bay Packers with that 1,329. So he really had a pretty good season. And in fact, his total was enough to place him 6th in the NFL this past season. Saquon Barkley led the NFL with 2,005 yards. When it comes to touchdowns rushing, well, this is where Ahman Green really drops off the map. His best season was 10. Actually, I'm sorry, he did have 15, but Jim Taylor in 1962 had 19 touchdowns rushing. Big lead over Aaron Jones, who in 2019 had 16. Those are your top 2 players. Now, Josh Jacobs had a really good season, again, as I said, in yards, but also in touchdowns. He had 15 touchdowns. which ties him for third all time with the Green Bay Packers. So a very, very good season. And in fact, only one off the NFL lead. Three players, Derrick Henry, Jamar Gibbs, and James Cook, all had 16. And then you had Josh Jacobs with 15. So he was really close as far as the touchdowns go. Now, when we're looking at the leaders in receiving in a single season, well, this is again this goes back and forth with whoever's going to be in the lead. But Davante Adams is, as far as receptions go, holds 3 of the top 4 spots, only broken up by Sterling Sharp. But Davante Adams in 2020 had 115 receptions. The very next season, he broke that record, the Green Bay record, when he had 123 receptions. So really a very incredible season that he had as far as receptions go. Not quite enough to make the top 10 all time in a single season, but really a very good total. Now, when you're looking at the guys from this past season, well, again, as I said, there's nobody really anywhere near that kind of total. Jaden Reed led the Green Bay Packers with 55. 55. There's not really anything to say about that except that they just moved the ball around. I mean, you had Jaden Reed 55, Tucker Kraft 50, Romeo Doubs 46, Wicks 39, Josh Jacobs as a running back 36, Christian Watson 29. So nobody was standing out. And it really was kind of a bad season for Jordan Love anyway. He didn't throw for a ton of yards, so it kind of got spread around. Now, Jamar Chase led the entire NFL with 127 receptions. So with only 55, Jaden Reed, who led the Green Bay Packers, would have finished, he did finish 62nd. 62nd. You figure there's 32 teams, almost double that, is really not a good number. Ahman Ray St. Brown was second with 115, so they led the NFL. But Davante Adams at 123 really had a great year. And that was 2021 and 2020. He's still producing. Unfortunately, not for Green Bay, but he is producing, and we'll see how he does this next season. Now, when it comes to yards in a single season, again, it's Davante Adams just beating out Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson had set the record in 2014 when he had 1,519 yards on 98 receptions. 2021 comes Davante Adams, and he had 1,553 yards. So he beat him out by 34 yards. Not too many, but it's enough. But it took him 123 receptions to do it. So Jordy Nelson really had a pretty good season. He averaged 15.5 yards per reception, while Davante Adams averaged 12.6. So that's your difference. And again, when we're looking at yards this past season for Green Bay, well, Jordan Reed on his 55 receptions had a good yards per reception at 15.6, but ended up with 857 yards. So they didn't have no one even close to a 1,000-yard season. In fact, their tight end was second with 707 yards. So those are your top 2 receivers this past season. And again, it was Jamar Chase who led the entire NFL with 1,708 yards. He was the Triple Crown guy as far as receiving goes. With 857 yards, that put Jaden Reed way down at 36th in the NFL. One last category as far as receivers go, and that's touchdowns in a single season. And again, Davante Adams in 2020 had 18 touchdowns in a single season, tied with Sterling Sharp, who did it in 1994 with 18. What's incredible is Don Hudson had held the record since 1942 with 17. So 52 years later, Sterling Sharp comes along and beats him by 1. And it's still, and technically, it's still the record even though Davante Adams tied him in 2020. So the record's been at 18 since 1994. So quite a long time. And seriously doubt there's anybody that's going to break it this year. Tucker Kraft had 7 this past season, while Jamar Chase with Cincinnati was leading the NFL with 17. So those are your wide receivers for Green Bay. Now, when we're looking at the defense, take a look at them real quick. As far as, we'll start with interceptions. All-time interception leader in a single season was Irv Comp in 1943 had 10. What's amazing is there's 11 players with 9. So only one made it to 10 and 11 have gotten close with 9. And that's the best they've done as far as interceptions go. This past season, let me look at that real quick for the Green Bay Packers when it comes to the defense and interceptions. Well, Xavier McKinney was very impressive. 8 interceptions. One off of coming in second. So very good season. We'll see how he does this year. It seems when you look at some of these records, it's very hard for a player to get on the list twice. Like when I'm looking at the all-time record, it's Night Train Lane had 14 in 1952 for the Rams. And I'm looking at the top 12 players because there's quite a few that had 12 and then 3 that had 13 and 1 with 14. But there's nobody that repeats. Nobody did it more than one time where they were in the top of the list. So it's a very hard thing, it seems, to make this list more than once. But so we'll see how Xavier McKinney does this next season. I mean, other teams may think twice before throwing in his direction. If he's going to have 8 interceptions, they may think twice about that. So he may not have that kind of a number this next season. So he was very impressive. I mean, really, when you're looking at it, as far as interceptions go, he ended up finishing second in interceptions. If I can get this to come up here. Every time when I look at the defense, it seems to want to give me a little bit of a hard time. One more time. Here we go. Getting there. Huh. I don't know why it doesn't want to give me this number. McKinney it's gotten off track here for some reason. Well, McKinney was second. I know that. I'm trying to find the guy. I don't know why it doesn't want to give me the right number here. Let me try this again. Switch over here and come back to it. Sorry about that. We'll skip it. So I know McKinney was second. I just can't remember who was first. Now, when looking at tackles for loss, Edgar and Cooper this season had 13, the only guy over 10. And then, as I was mentioning, Rashawn Gary had moved up the list quite a bit. He had 9. So I was thinking he needed 10, but we'll see how he does as far as tackles for loss. But all time on the team, Clay Matthews holds the record with 18. He did that in 2010. And 3 guys had 17. One of them was Clay Matthews also. In 2009, he had 17, and then in 2010, he had 18. Great player for Green Bay for a period of time. Bonnie Holiday in 1999 and Zadarius Smith in 2019 had 17. So 3 players with 17 and 1 with 18. All right, I got this up here. Kirby Joseph for Detroit had 9 interceptions. Xavier McKinney was second with 8. Those are your leaders as far as interceptions go. So I knew he was second. I was just trying to remember Kirby Joseph, but really a very excellent number. All right. So as far as the tackles for loss go, Myles Garrett had 22, which would have been enough to set the record for Green Bay by quite a big difference. But Myles Garrett had 22, which was the most, only player over 20, in fact. But Edgar and James with 13, not too bad. He was kind of down the list a little bit, but not too bad. He finished 15th. So middle of the pack there, but not too bad. Now when it comes to sacks all time, that's Tim Harris on the unofficial list and the official list. He did it in 1989. The official list started in 1982, while the unofficial list started in 1960. Tim Harris had 19 and a half sacks in 1989. Unofficially, Ezra Johnson in 1978 had 17 and a half, and Reggie White in 1998 had 16. On the official list, Tim Harris had 19 and a half, like I said, in 1989. Reggie White, 1998, had 16. And then Aaron Campman, 15 and a half in 2006. Those are your leaders. And this is a category, really, they fell off the map here as far as Green Bay goes, something they're going to definitely want to change. But Rashawn Gary led the team with 7.5 sacks. Davante Wyatt had 5. Those are your top 2 players. No one in double digits, so really an area where they're going to want to work on as far as that goes. So that is a look at your Green Bay Packers. Now, coming into 2025, how do they look? Well, the odds makers have them at 9.5 wins. They had 11 last season. I don't see why they can't get there. Again, they play in a very tough division, but and they only had 1 win in the division, so they're going to really have to improve there to do better than they did last year. I think they can at least get to 11 wins, which they had last season. Now, I don't know. I think that would be good enough for a wild card. I don't see, like Detroit had 15 wins, Minnesota had 14. I don't see either one of them getting that many wins. So it's going to be an interesting fight this season to see where they end up. But I do think they'll beat the 9.5 win look. So their fantasy outlook, and why do I say that? Well, they still have Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs has easily a year where he can repeat what he did last season. He's just a very strong runner, and he can catch some passes out of the backfield as well. So that's an area where I think it's going to really be helpful for them. The area, when you're looking at the team, Jordan Love has to have a better season than he did last year. Whether he continues to throw to every receiver and no wide receiver or tight end or running back, in fact, stands out over the rest of them by any great length, he's got to have a better season than he did last year. Got to not get hurt, and he's just got to throw and just do a little bit better all around. They did pick up Matthew Golden, so we'll see how it goes. But right now, their wide receivers are Matthew Golden's wide receiver 44 in ADP, well, in the draft right now. Jaden Reed's wide receiver 46, and Romeo Doubs wide receiver 66. So they just have nobody impressive. We'll see how Matthew Golden does. If he can stand out and do something special. Even the tight end, Tucker Kraft, is tight end 13. So kind of middle of the pack. You can pick up any of these players 8th round on. So we'll see. The reason I think they have a good chance is Jordan Love. who had a bad season, and right now he's quarterback 16 going in the 11th round or so. But in 2023, he was quarterback 6. He threw for over 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, and he rushed for 247 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he had a total of 36 touchdowns. If he has a season more like that, where he throws for 4,000 yards versus the less than 3,400 he threw last season, that's going to really bump him up the list. So if you're kind of a person who picks up the wide receivers, running backs, and kind of waits to pick up a quarterback, he's a possibility. If he flips this season and goes back to something like 2023, you're talking about a first, top of the list as far as quarterbacks. I mean, quarterback 6 isn't bad, so that's something to look out for. So it's a possibility. You throw in Matthew Golden. I'm not even mentioning Watson. If he can play, if he can ever stay healthy for half a season, throw him in the mix too. I mean, the one good thing is you have so many wide receivers, somebody should be open. And again, they'll try to rush Josh Jacobs a lot because he's just very reliable and just a good running back. If I was picking anybody up on this team, I definitely would be looking at Josh Jacobs, who's going in the second round, though. So you have to pick him up somewhere mid-second round if you want him. And then if I, for some reason, is waiting, I might check out Jordan Love. I'm not really sure I would do that. Otherwise, I don't see myself picking up any one of these receivers or the tight end, honestly, as far as fantasy goes. Of course, that doesn't say anything about how the team will do as a real NFL team. I do think they'll finish with more than 9.5 wins, though. And we'll talk about next time after I talk about Chicago Bears, we'll talk about this division and where I think every team will finish, whether it's first, second, third, fourth. So that's a look at the Green Bay Packers. Next up is the Chicago Bears, and that'll wrap up the NFC North division. So stick around for that. And if you're interested in the AFC, I've already covered those. And I did those before I was on YouTube, so they're all just audio, which obviously most everybody's probably doing the audio anyway. But if you're interested, I do have this on YouTube now, so you can watch or listen through YouTube. And of course, you can listen on Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you might listen. You can contact me if you have a question or a comment at justthestatснfl@gmail.com or on Facebook, X, Instagram. So there's plenty of places. I appreciate it if you would subscribe and like this podcast. It really helps out. And as I continue to try to improve on this podcast. So that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats. I appreciate you listening. And so until next time, I am out.